Affordable Housing bi-monthly meeting. Um, just to inform you all, we will be recording the presentation part of this meeting, as you can see, and then we'll be posting that on our website. Um, so today we've got a really great lineup, and I'm going to go ahead and drop the agenda into the chat. Hope everyone was able to get out and vote yesterday. Great. And just to introduce myself, my name is Andrea Calderon. I am the board president for the Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition. Um, uh, and we've got some other members of our team on board as well. Miriam Hicks, the vice president of the coalition. Rania Ehrenfoy, I'm not sure if she's on yet, but is our finance what is treasurer, and then we have China Osborne, who is our secretary. Melissa Toledo Antiveras is also on our team, and will hopefully be joining us later on. And then we've got Brittany Espinoza, who is really providing some great administrative support for our team and is our only paid staffer. And so, we welcome you to become members of the Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition. This is how we sustain ourselves at the coalition and really try to make sure that we're able to pay Brittany really for all the great work that she's doing and cover a couple of other functions. The way that we operate wouldn't be possible without your support. So we really encourage you all to join. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. If it is possible, if folks, we have a number of people, we've got 65 folks in the room right now. Um, oh, Eric, let's see, we'll have one of our members respond and drop a link for how to become a member. Thank you for asking. So we have a number of really great presenters on the line today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. To begin, we've got Cabinet Secretary Sarita Nair of Workforce Solutions at the state. She has, served in a number of government functions, most recently as the chief of staff or the chief administrative officer, apologies, for the city of Albuquerque, overseeing 22 departments with a budget of over $1.2 billion. She was the chief governmental accountability officer and general counsel for the Office of the State Auditor. And before entering public service, Sarita was a shareholder at a law firm of Sutton, Thayer, and Brown, representing public and private clients in business matters, mergers, acquisitions, and financing. Sarita is a proud graduate of the UNM Community and Regional Planning Program at the University of Maryland and holds a bachelor's degree in African American Studies from Wesleyan.
I'll send an
Um,
invite if that
oh,
Tim
Lisa, I
works.
think your mic is on. Thank you. No, that's okay. Thank you. Um, okay. After Sarita, we will have Katie Simon and Natalie Green present together. Katie is currently serves as a field representative for U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich's office, where she works directly with constituents, local leaders, and community organizations to advance initiatives that support New Mexicans across the state. Before joining Senator Heinrich's team, Katie served as a public affairs specialist with the City of Albuquerque's Health, Housing, and Homelessness Department, where she managed outreach and communications focused on improving access to housing, health resources, and social services. And Natalie Green has worked in the social service field for over 16 years, um, and is currently serving as a housing and neighborhood revitalization administrator for the city of Las Cruces. She leads a team of 8 overseeing affordable housing programs funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and Economic Development Initiative. Katie and Natalie will be discussing the Road to Housing Act of 2025, which was passed by the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee on July 29th of 2025, so very recently. It's the first markup of the housing package in almost a decade and passed Committee 24-0. So, pretty important piece there. It includes a wide range of policy approaches, such as housing affordability, provisions to boost supply, modernize financing options, reduce regulatory barriers, and promote economic mobility, also enhancing program oversight and coordination. With all of that said, I will pass it off to Secretary Nair. And thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Andrea. Good to see you all. Good to be back. I think I was here a few months ago. I'm going to run through just a couple quick slides just to give you an update on where we are with the Office of Housing, and then happy to take some questions. So let's see here. Share and this thing, and then share, and then this thing. Okay, great. Can you see a thing that says funding overview?
Yep.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So, as most of you know, April or so, we got news that the Office of Housing was moving over to Department of Workforce Solutions. This actually became officially effective on June 30th. And it came with a lot of money for very many years. So there was some operating money. The big 110 million that I know many of you probably helped to advocate for this year. 5 million for encampments. There was still money sitting around from a GROW appropriation in 2024. We have a grant from HUD that actually passes through the Department of Finance Administration to do a program that I'll talk a little bit about. We had capital outlay, the governor's capital outlay, 13.5 for statewide housing projects with DFA administers, but we work together to make sure that those projects are all aligned. And then capital outlay for housing in Bernalillo County and Santa Fe County from 2023, of which 4.9 million was still around. So out of all these sources, right? So some of them are earmarked for things, some of them were sort of unofficially earmarked for things, or they had been earmarked and then the earmark was vetoed, but we still try to honor the intent. So you'll see the bulk of it, 63% so far, has gone to affordable and attainable housing, followed by emergency shelter. Next most is supportive housing, and then youth-related programming, which kind of spans a couple of these different categories. Homeless services, which are other than emergency shelter, and then homelessness prevention is and technical assistance and evaluation. So here's, these are all publicly available, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time or leave this up for very long, but these are all the affordable and attainable housing projects that have been awarded so far. We then put out a request for proposals for the balance of money that we have in for the office, basically, and that closed on October 13th and is still under evaluation. In terms of emergency shelter, mostly this went to operating the gateway, and happy on a couple weeks ago to announce that 142 new beds had gone into service, as well as the first responder receiving area because of this funding. But, I've said this to the city, I've said this with the city there, to the media, I'm saying it to you. If this is truly a priority for whoever is sitting in City Hall next year, that this should be funded with recurring city money. It is a condition of this grant that they identify a plan for that. And as most of you being residents of Albuquerque, I would encourage you to talk to those people if you agree that this, I'm not sure what is more important than this in our city that got the budget that this needs, but this money is going away. And so they need to figure out another way to run the gateway, which is actually a wonderful facility. And when people talk about what the city needs, usually what they're describing is what we already have in the gateway that was kind of sitting half empty, but is now, fully operational. So let's make sure that stays that way. And then in the supportive housing and youth categories, you'll just see there's a couple of projects here and there that we're excited about. I see Natalie's on the phone. You know, Les Cruces, just want to shout out. You saw them on the affordable page. You see them here. They've just done an amazing job putting together, whoops, sorry, a really clean, clear package that really showed what it looks like to have unified priorities in an entire region. And you know, just want to shout her out. She's awesome, and her whole team. And then for youth, the investment there is the City of Albuquerque's Young Adult Housing and Treatment Navigation Center that is set to come online in February, as well as that grant that we received from HUD 1.9, and then a family stabilization pilot project that is going through PED to Albuquerque, Las Cruces, and Santa Fe Public Schools to really beef up the case management and support services available to McKinney-Vento families. And, you know, we haven't really talked about this YESI grant publicly, so I do like to, I have started like weaving it in, but I won't go through all these points, but basically we just don't have a good system in this state for youth dealing with youth homelessness and the specifics around that and the unique circumstances. And so this is a really youth-centered effort, partners all over, whoops, I don't have the partners slide in here, but partners all over the state that are working to define youth homelessness, make sure that coordinated entry looks like what they need it to look like, and define some statewide outcomes for youth serving projects. So very exciting stuff there. And then I did talk a little bit about McKinney-Vento. So, you know, going into, I'm going to stop share here. Going into the legislative session, there are a lot of ideas out there, and I would love to hear what the ideas this group has been talking about. I think our office is most focused on trying to get some sort of investment, continued investment in housing and homelessness that is maybe a little more predictable. So it has a little longer burn rate than what's been given so far, which everybody's super grateful for. But, you know, I think we've heard very clear from the development community that being able to project a few years out is really important. So we know that that's going to be a central part of advocacy. We know that there's many zoning and land use and tenant protections and all kinds of other legislation. Our calculus is really what can get done in a 30-day session. So there are a couple of zoning things that we are considering, but, you know, we've just seen what happens with these large preemptive legislative packages and, you know, just wanting to make sure that we're putting things on the agenda that will get through and that will not cause divisiveness as it has in the past. And then also really looking at trying to institutionalize emergency rental assistance. We kind of missed that opportunity when the ARPA money ran out, and I think we're seeing what that looks like now. And to me, it's a different, equally important part of the system, but should not be necessarily combined with whatever's going, you know, with those investments in housing and homelessness. It should probably be moving towards a recurring income stream if that's possible. And it should have, you know, some defining legislation that centralizes within the executive who is actually in charge of rental assistance, even if that's still finance and administration, and just really lays out some of the connectivity that needs to happen so that we have a consistent and effective program across the state. So I will stop there and happy to take questions and hear ideas from you all. Thank you.
Is it okay if we just jump in with questions? Sarita, are there any plans around the Office of Housing in the upcoming legislative session to try to codify that or make it permanent? Just curious what the thinking is there.
Nope. You know, you all follow this closely enough to know that that's sort of where housing issues went to die in past sessions. And so most of you know me well enough to know that I'm not really bang your head against the wall kind of girl. As far as I'm concerned, we have an Office of Housing. It's here. And we have a new governor coming in, 10 months after a legislative session, and they're going to need to put that where they want it to align with their priorities, and in conjunction with whoever's sitting in the legislature. I think that is an awesome thing to really think about and consider for the 27 session, but we are not running that bill in 26. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just wanted to one, ask about the support that you need to get any more funding done, and if you'll keep this group involved and how we can support you in terms of like testimony or whatever you need done. Like,
absolutely, and thank you for that. So we're just doing some stakeholder listening sessions and things like that right now to finalize and pin down the legislative agenda. And then we need to, sit with the administration, make sure we understand what they're willing to put on the call, that's not, to the extent there's anything that's not automatically germane because it's budgetary, and pin down our sponsors. And then we'll come back out with, sort of like the legislative agenda, and would love all of your, any of your support on the things that you believe in. And so yes, absolutely, we'll be back to talk about that probably in the next 6 weeks. I mean, I'm not asking to come back and take more time on your agenda. I'm just saying we'll disseminate it through all the networks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Winter?
Yes. So my view is we don't have sort of housing code or, consumer protection for tenants enforcement anywhere at any level. And since the new housing application fees law has come into effect, we at New Mexico Eviction Prevention have had opportunity for, we thought we'd do a sort of favor and say, there's this new law, the max on late fees for rent has gone down, and you're supposed to do this if you're going to have fees. And we've had a few just blatantly tell us they're not following the law. And I don't know if Monet's on here or not, but she's had that face to face when she went to with somebody here in Albuquerque. And so, there is a new law, but people are not following it. And I think Maria's on here. I think the Attorney General's office's opinion is that they don't have enforcement authority. And so I don't think this is something the legislature would want to get in, but I'm not sure how to tackle it otherwise. Is just, where would you put litigation and fund it? Because I think so the sort of wrongdoers, because it's growing. I think we're all seeing it, the black mold, especially up north because they had so much rain. How can we do that? It's the out of state, it's the venture capital funds, and it's the big corporates out of state. They extract all, it's a venture capital fund. They extract all the value, throw it back in shambles, sell in 2 years, and are out. And we can't sustain that. And so that's my question, is how can, is there a way to get somebody to litigate this? And how to pay for it. And I think some of us on this call are interested in doing that too, but fronting those costs is, but we might have some out-of-state attorneys that are firms that are interested in partnering on that. So anyway, that's a lot, but.
Thanks, Winter. Yeah, I was just, as you're talking, pulling up SB 267, I think it is here. That's the one you're talking about, I think, right? Yeah. And yeah, like we've been on the other side of these bills with no actual remedy before, and it's really challenging. And at the same time, a lot of people don't, a lot of bills won't get through if you do add a private right of, so I get it. But I am surprised to hear the AG doesn't feel like they have authority there, but I don't, I'm not a lawyer anymore. So I guess all I can say is if there is a related issue that falls under the HRB, Human Rights Act, maybe that's something we can bring in through that part of my department. So
Okay.
discrimination,
Oh, we got that too.
yeah. Yeah, and there was a bill that we actually liked that would have moved all of the housing and sort of public accommodation claims out of our office and moved them into, well, it
Yeah.
would have created new rights of action, and then would have moved them over to the AG's office, which I actually thought was a great idea because I don't have lawyers here. I just have, investigators and hearing officers and that kind of thing. But certainly, to the extent there are things we can do under the HRA, let's talk about it. And,
Okay.
and if there are conversations about enforcement of this, I'm happy to participate if it's helpful.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Winter. Andrea.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Sarita. I had a quick question about gaps in knowledge that you're seeing, of that policymakers across the state have. We are sort of, we're limited as a 501c3, as you know, in lobbying. And so, but would really be interested in concentrating our efforts and ensuring that both decision makers and residents are, better understand the impacts of affordable housing, opportunities, how housing works in general. And so, yeah, I was just wondering if you had any insights there.
Wow, that's a great question. Tough one. On the production side, the gaps in knowledge we hear the most are complaints about local government not understanding or doing well things, everything from, zoning, permitting, inspection, etc., administration of the Affordable Housing Act. Municipal League does do trainings, counties do trainings. There are local governments that are doing it really well. But and then I think as people start to really unpack those complaints, they end up being more about having adequate staff than they are about an actual policy. It's because there's the policy and then there's like, do you have enough people to do the thing? And it's usually turns out to be the latter that is causing what people consider to be gaps in administration, or knowledge gaps, I think is how you phrased it. So I think that's tough. That's a tough one, but it's definitely an area that I hear a lot about. We don't have like to Winter's point, right? We don't have a real system of tenants' rights enforcement. And without that, like it's tough to think about doing a lot of know your rights campaigns when, rights don't have remedies. But at the same time, there is just the pressure of people, getting those complaints and those kinds of things. So I do think there's just massive lack of knowledge around tenants' rights. And where we see it a lot is in small landlords. And so there's two things, right? There's like knowing disregard that Winter was talking about of like the larger corporate landlords, but then there's the smaller. I have, over the years, my family has accumulated 3 duplexes and now I'm suddenly a landlord and I've never even read it. Like I didn't even think it was a thing. And so I do think there's probably some good room for education and some knowledge gaps there that could be filled, particularly for the small landlords. Especially because they do tend to be like, more relational. They are going to give you that pass on your rent, if you're having a tough month. And so we want them in the mix, but they may just not really know or understand that they need to devote the resources to things like, the standard of living that is expected to be provided. Lisa?
Another question I had was just around the RFP that was due October 13th, and just if there's anything you can share around timing and when the Office of Housing might make more decisions.
Yeah, within the next 2 weeks, we'll have announcements.
Great, thank you.
Meaning this week as one of the weeks. So by the end
Okay.
of next
By
week,
the end
I
of
guess
next week. Okay.
are the right words. Yeah, we got caught up with a couple things are going on at the federal level that have taken a little bit of time over here, Department of Workforce Solutions. So
Understood.
apologies. It's taking a little longer than we wanted it to, but for sure we understand the time pressure.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Whoops. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarita. Really appreciate that. I guess I had one more question. You know, just coming from the data perspective, I know there is a lot of need at all administrative levels to sort of ensure some back-end strategy pieces are in place for data management and data warehousing and data sharing and all of that, as well as some transparency pieces, that could be helpful, for us in terms of being able to track what the spend is or where the money is going, or, really understand, whether what we're allocating, what we're asking representatives to allocate is enough to meet the need and at what rate that's moving. Um, in the absence of those systems, is there a way that you would recommend that we could kind of stay up to date, aside from having you present here? Or, and if that's the case, of course, we always love having you. Yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, thanks. We are building a website for the Office of Housing, and we're pretty close. Like we've got for those of you who've had to deal with that, wireframes are done. Data's being populated to show all the investments of our office. It'll have Indian Affairs, the tribal investments in housing for the past few years, and eventually we'll get more on the capital side up there too. We're not using the Story Maps product, but it's a similar concept of, pictures and stories and talking about stages of projects and how many units are being created. And so we'll at least get that level of transparency out there in the next, I'd say, 1 or 2 months. What we're missing, I mean, I don't know if we're missing it, but what doesn't exist is what's the delta like? So what is the number that we're trying to hit, or what is that we need? And how do we know that we're almost there? Or how do we know that we're investing in the right tier? And there's studies kind of all over the place, but not a real centralized inventory. And I did very consciously make the decision not to make that a priority for the office in the, 18 months that we have, because that's a big project. But I do think that is worth investment, and maybe that is something driven more. And I see Renia here, like maybe that's a university driven thing rather than a state government thing. Maybe it's something that we invest in Mortgage Finance Authority to do, but that, they put out that report every year, and it's a great report with lots of great information, but it doesn't give you these like numbers. So I think collectively as a state, we need to decide, like, do we want them, or do we want to track lag indicators like rent and home costs that tend to follow pretty directly supply and demand, right? And as the indicators of whether we're getting there and whether our investment is enough. And if we do want to have some of those really specific targets, then it is, like you said, it's a massive data project that we need to actually invest separately in.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
I just want to give one more moment, if you have it, to see if anyone else has just any last questions. Okay.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that you all do in community, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Bye.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care, Sarita. All right. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in that. All right. So now we're going to be moving over to Katie Simon and Natalie Green, who will be touching on the Road to Housing Act. Katie and Natalie, I'll just go ahead and pass it off to you, and we'll do a Q&A section right after that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you, Natalie, for being my co-pilot on this one. We are going to tell you guys a little bit about the Road to Housing Act, which is a pretty big housing package that recently made some progress in the Senate. And actually, since we first started talking about telling this group about this bill, it actually moved forward in the Senate. So it passed committee, as Andrea mentioned, I think it was 28 unanimously out of committee. It's a collection of, basically this is the first major bipartisan housing bill in a decade. And it just passed the Senate on October 9th as amended to the National Defense Authorization Act. This is kind of a must-pass defense bill, so a lot of other bills try to hitch a ride on the NDAA to make their way through the Senate. So kind of common legislative vehicle. So Senator Heinrich did support the Road to Housing Act with a voice vote as an amendment to the NDAA, which he then supported as it passed out of the Senate. But I will note that Senator Heinrich does not sit on the committee that authored this bill. So it didn't really come in front of him or our office in too much detail before it hit the Senate floor. But delighted to talk to you guys about it anyways. And that's why I'm grateful for Natalie's help on some of the provisions that she was paying a little bit more attention to from the grantee perspective. So this bill is made up of about 30 provisions. It was stuff that had been previously introduced last Congress, fairly bipartisan bills. And it's a lot of things to incentivize building new housing, make some changes to programs, increase some oversight, author some reports. And it authorizes a whole bunch of new funding, but it does not actually appropriate it. So basically that means that it says HUD shall create this grant program upon the appropriation of funds. So the appropriators still have to do their job to actually give HUD that money next go round, but this bill creates the programs for when they are funded in the future. So this is how it's structured. There's 7 titles, like I said, kind of 30 provisions. We're going to talk to you guys mostly about what's in Title II, some things in Title V, and then a couple things in Title VI and VII. But if anyone has questions about things in this bill that we don't hit on, we have some resource guides and some, section by section, if anyone has questions about other parts of the bill that we thought was maybe a little bit less relevant for this group. So I'll get started on incentives to build here, and then Natalie, jump in if there's anything you want to add. One of the things that they're doing, this bill does, is it gives some extra weight for competitive HUD grant applications in opportunity zones. So if anyone doesn't know what opportunity zones are, this is a tax mechanism created during the first Trump term, and it was just reauthorized this summer under the big, beautiful bill. One tiny, not so horrible provision of that bill. But basically the governor has the authority to create opportunity zones, and she has to do that before next July. So that is, these opportunity zones is an issue that you folks should pay attention to as it relates to housing, because it's a tax vehicle to reward private investors for building housing or investing capital in buildings that are in these opportunity zones. And the districts stand for 10 years. So the opportunity zones that we currently have in New Mexico were drawn by Susana Martinez. So if anyone's wondering why that map doesn't make a whole lot of sense and why Windrock is an opportunity zone, but the International District isn't, that would be why. So new opportunity zones coming to the state next year, and so any HUD grant applications that are for projects in those zones will get extra weight on the HUD grant review side. Also, it gives the Federal Transit Authority the ability to reward cities and applicants that have pro-housing policies near transit. So that's, if in Albuquerque, we allowed more density close to transit lines, expedited review, those kinds of things will be rewarded from the Department of Transportation because we have some friendly housing policies near our major bus lines. This bill also tells HUD to create a federal best practices guide for zoning reform to help small communities reconsider their zoning codes to be more pro housing and better for building. And then there are some expanded exemptions from environmental review and categorical exclusions from NEPA for certain infill projects, office conversions, and what they call small unit projects, which typically they've been referring to projects under 25 units for that provision. And then it does create 2 new grant funds, what they're calling the Innovation Fund and a fund for pre-approved housing designs. So the Innovation Fund is something that cities can apply for if they have taken some actions to create pro-housing policies in their localities, and apply for some money to do something creative with their creative new policies. It's kind of flexible, but it's a new funding source for cities that have proactively done some things about solving their housing shortage. And they can, the idea is that cities can use this pot of money for whether it's infrastructure or other kinds of planning or other things that build on the work they've been doing on housing. And then this second fund is to help municipalities create pre-approved housing designs, like the way that Albuquerque did for ADUs. They're already pre-approved with the planning department. So if other folks wanted to take that to the next level, they could apply for this fund to pre-approve a whole bunch of housing design to expedite reviews there. Natalie, anything you want to add?
No, I'll do the slides on CDBG and home changes.
Perfect. 2 new pilot programs are also getting created with this bill. A new whole home repair program for low and moderate income owners or renters. This is the idea is that this is a new whole home repair program that's not funded by existing sources. There's a couple of other things that fix roofs here and there, or do some other repairs on a smaller scale. This is intended to be a new program to meet a need that's not covered by existing funding sources. And then there's also a new pilot program to look at vacant and abandoned building conversions and help municipalities with those. So these 2 programs and the 2 new grants created these are going to be available upon appropriated funding. But this bill kind of creates the vehicle. So some changes to programs. This is something that Senator Heinrich worked on when it was a standalone bill, is streamlining inspections for housing choice voucher holders. The idea is that if you are a housing choice voucher holder and the unit you want to move into is in a LIHTC financed building, there is no reason that you shouldn't have to go through an inspection process all over again, given that the building was already built to federal standards. So this kind of solves that for public housing authorities trying to place people. If their unit that they're trying to place someone in is financed by LIHTC or home funds, it should satisfy the inspection requirement. And it also allows for some video inspections in rural areas to streamline that process a little bit. So this is something that, Senator Heinrich was on this bill when it was a standalone bill last Congress. It also permanently, the Road to Housing Act permanently reauthorizes CDBG disaster recovery. In conversations with the state, I think they've had some challenges administering this funding source in New Mexico. And hopefully some of the tweaks in this bill will make that process slightly easier on the state to get that money. Permanently authorizing it means that it will just become part of HUD's budget every year rather than something Congress has to go out of their way to remember to fund. There have been a couple of years where CDBG-DR has not gotten funded. And it also creates a permanent office within HUD to administer CDBG-DR, which hopefully will someday, when HUD staffing is in a better place, will increase the capacity to administer that funding source. There are some changes to the Rural Housing Service, which is another thing that Senator Heinrich pushed for when he was the chair of the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee last Congress. This tweak basically decouples the rental assistance from maturing mortgages for USDA rural development funded properties that were funded several years ago, whose mortgages are now maturing. If a new nonprofit wants to take ownership of a building, they won't necessarily lose the rental assistance that's coming with that because the mortgage is maturing. So it just kind of decouples those things so that folks that want to keep previously financed buildings affordable don't get punished for that by losing the rental assistance. And there's a change for veterans that the disability compensation is no longer included in income calculations for HUD VASH. So those are some of the program tweaks in this bill. And I will let Natalie take it away on home, COC, and ESG.
Yeah, so exciting change for the home program. And for those who don't know, there's only 3 participating jurisdictions in New Mexico that receive home. So it's an impact to Albuquerque, Las Cruces, and the state of New Mexico, which provides those funding through Housing New Mexico. So one, it increases the administrative cap from 10% to 15%, which is significant because CDBG is at 20%. So the difference between CDBG and home was quite stark. It'll eliminate the 24-month commitment deadlines, which has been a challenge for some organizations with their home funds, especially because they layered so many rules into the home program that 24 months can be a concern. It'll streamline a lot of the property inspections. And then more importantly, it'll allow more nonprofit organizations to qualify for CHODOs. So CHODOs, which is community housing development organizations, can be difficult to get that certification. And so this will sort of broaden those folks who would meet that definition. For COC programs and ESG, they're going from 1-year awards to 2-year awards, which I think most people will be more excited because that provides a little more consistency. There are some things about audits and reports for HMIS and coordinated entry within that. And it also allows an application waiver for ESG for some of the shelter and street outreach caps. I think the next slide. For those who are CDBG recipients, which there's 5 in the state, Las Cruces, Santa Fe, Rio Rancho, Farmington, Albuquerque, and then the state of New Mexico, so 6 actually, they would use a housing growth improvement rate that would then they would track municipalities based on that housing growth improvement rate, and they could lower their CDBG formula grants if they're not meeting housing production goals. That's a concern for us across the state. Again, while Las Cruces has been successful in increasing our housing supply, I don't know that that's going to be the case across the country. And so that could harm some of the smaller municipalities that get that formula funding. So our recommendation, and we have been writing letters to our legislative delegation to ask them to amend that. The recommendations that we put in our letter is that they set the baseline for CDBG funds and then create a separate incentive fund for those communities that are increasing their housing supply. And then also add some additional exemptions and adjustments. Many, not so much in New Mexico, but in some of the other states, they create like county consortiums, or they have, again, balance of state. And many of the things that they're putting into this Build Now Housing Act are around zoning. And so, you know, counties don't have an impact around some of the local zoning. And so we see some potential conflicts there. And then we're also asking that they include some sort of technical assistance or capacity building for those smaller jurisdictions that may not have the same infrastructure that the bigger recipients of CDBG and home get. And then the next slide, I think, is...
So what's up next, since this bill did clear the Senate, the NDAA needs to pass the House still. So at some point, the chambers will have to reconcile the NDAA and all of the various amendments. Natalie, go ahead on call to action.
Yeah, so I'm happy to share the letter that we sent to Representative Vasquez, and we did copy Senator Heinrich and Senator Ben Ray Lafon. I did not send it to Representative Stanberry since she wasn't our delegate, but I'm happy to share what we wrote to Vasquez if anyone wants to have that information. But we are asking that they reach out to their colleagues on the NDAA and include the road to housing in their vote. And so that way some of those provisions will pass.
And we do have some helpful me stop my share. Some links to help if folks want to read the section by section of the bill, and some other explainers by the Low Income Housing Coalition. To what Natalie was saying about the CDBG concerns, the House may or may not get a chance to amend that because the whole package was attached as an amendment to the defense bill. There wasn't really a chance for senators to nitpick those little provisions the way there would have been if the bill had had its own vote on the floor by itself. So the NDAA is a good chance to fast track bills, but sometimes these little tweaks that might affect New Mexico more than other states don't get a chance to be fully ironed out in the process. So that is what Natalie's letter to the House side is talking about. So we have, so the National Income Housing Coalition did put out both full bill explainer and some section by section things, and the banking committee put out their own section by section as well. So happy to take questions about any of this. Like, we tried to keep it fairly high level, but with the points that might affect you folks the most. What do you want to know?
Katie, if you happen to have some insight on what it took to get to this point, yeah, it'd be great to sort of hear what's going on over there in DC.
This bill's an interesting one. So like I said, it came out of a committee Senator Heinrich is not on. So we're not quite party to all of the intercommittee dynamics, but this was a joint bill. Is a bill co-sponsored by Elizabeth Warren and Tim Scott, who are the ranking member and chair of the Banking and Housing Committee in the Senate. It's the whole thing is bipartisan. I think they tried to take bills that were fairly popular that had been previously introduced and, put them all together, give everybody a little bit of something. A lot of these kind of smaller program tweaks or, ideas for new grant programs and things that were kind of introduced as one-offs in previous, earlier in this Congress or last Congress, and, tried to put them into a fairly appetizing package. I think, because this bill doesn't appropriate any money, it's usually easier to swallow for folks to say, sure, we're happy to create a grant program and then figure out how to fund it later. Getting any bill out of both chambers is an interesting task this year. Oh, and thanks, China. Yes, the Bipartisan Policy Center had their own readout of it as well. Yeah, the fact that this one came out of committee unanimously definitely turned heads. We have not been seeing a whole lot of that lately, but I think there's been appetite to make some of these changes for a little while now, and I think it's recognition of the crisis in affordability and building, and how we could all do a slightly better job about that, and trying to get the federal government involved in that goal, even if zoning is up to local jurisdictions and all of that.
Great, thank you. Winter?
Katie, this is not directly related to this bill, but it's something I really just became aware of, I think, this week and last week. And I thought I saw Joanne DeMichelle from the Manufactured Homes Association on here somewhere. And she can speak to it more, but I also, after I saw a presentation by her, then I attended a session by the Urban Institute on the corporate ownership of housing. And it's always been harder for us to find sort of federal things that are going to be, sort of immediately impactful on the ground here in New Mexico. But so one of the things is that these venture capital funds are getting financing from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to come in and buy these complexes and then just, manipulate people out of every possible dollar they can. And I feel like there's some room for federal regulation, or at least some sort of proposal or investigation or something like that. My understanding is in the big beautiful bill, and it might have even been existence prior to that, and it's exacerbating the situation, is that one of the reasons they're selling about every 2 years is that they can take all of the depreciation in year one. So anyway, I would like to, talk to the federal delegation about first of all, really understanding what's going on, and then trying to knock it off, at least for, venture capital funds I don't think they need that, the finance, that kind of financing. So.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's an issue for sure. I know last Congress, when Sherrod Brown was the chairman of the banking committee, he wrote some oversight letters about one particular corporate owner of some mobile home parks in Ohio, and we were in touch with their team a little bit last year. But how that went, I don't think they got a whole lot of response from the company. But we were engaged a little bit on that last Congress. The manufactured housing provisions in this bill, there's 3 of them. It's sections 301, 302, 303. A couple of them have to do with FHA and lending. There's a lot of things in this bill that are like, FHA should look at how lending happens, whether it's small loans or loans for modular housing. I didn't go into that too much in detail for this group, but there are a lot of things in this bill that talk about FHA evaluating some of their lending practices for small dollar loans and for loans that encourage modular housing. Whether it's making it easier to build some of these more, interesting building materials these days. So there's so the things in this bill really have more to do with lending and standards for that. If anyone wants to talk more in depth about that, we can. These are provisions that my boss did not really touch too much in the crafting of this bill. Like I said, we weren't on that committee. When they were standalone bills, they weren't ours. But one of the things that I think we had been talking to Senator Heinrich about a little bit last year was updating the federal definition of manufactured housing to include some of these modular and prefab units not built on a permanent chassis, to be a little bit more open to some of the just more interesting kinds of building materials that have been coming out the last few years, so that it diversifies the federal government's view of what modular housing can look like. No, it's not exactly your question, Winter, but those are the parts in this bill that have to do with modular housing. Go ahead, Johanna.
Hi. First, I just want to also clarify that like most of these funds that are doing this sort of thing are not venture capital funds. They're private equity funds, and it's important to like have that distinction. I would also love to understand like what the financing provisions are in this particular legislation around like accessory dwelling units. I think that's really important here in New Mexico for us to be able to have affordable and accessible financing for not only the original purchase for those who are trying to purchase their own home or those that are financing it, but also affordable financing for those ADUs for both the creation of them and then the financing of them for the long term. And that's one of the struggles that I think, like as they become more readily available across the country, unless they're subsidized with federally funded loans like a regular single family mortgage, people aren't able to afford to put one on their house to create more affordable housing on an individual level. And like making sure that that is part of this provision is an important part. I'd also like to disagree with the previous discussor about the associated depreciation. Most of these projects wouldn't pencil if there wasn't depreciation that was available in the first year. So it's really important for those that are trying to have projects and fund them to have that as an economic incentive, or housing just won't get built. Love to hear about how this is being included in the legislation.
Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's anything specifically in here about financing ADUs through FHA, but I will make a note to double check on that. And that's something that we can look at
Yeah,
in the future.
I don't remember seeing anything like that. I did see where there's additional reporting requirements. So FHA and some of the other people around housing will have to do monthly reports and additional, at least annual testimony to Congress. So maybe some of that stuff will start to improve as well.
I know there was something in here about FHA, taking a look at how they're financing smaller dollar loans, which might be, a mechanism to fund ADUs. A lot of this is, we're gonna have to keep a close eye on how they roll it out. And that's where I think, in the senator's role on oversight, and we're gonna need to look closely about how HUD is actually executing a lot of these things and asking questions, Johanna, like, whether their examination of smaller dollar loans, if people are using them for ADUs, or if that's an acceptable use, and kind of that's the kind of thing that we can put into future
So there is
future oversight.
There's one section, I think it's section 303, that I do see they talk about ADUs, and they want they're going to allow property improvement loans to be used for the construction of ADUs. But full disclosure, I didn't read that section since it's primarily around manufactured housing, and it's not something that we typically handle. So I'll have to go back and look at that section a little closer.
I mean, and it's especially important around manufactured housing because a lot of ADUs are going to be, prefab homes that people are going to be able to drop in their backyards, and making sure that like both manufactured and stick built ADUs are accessible, like in terms of FHA, and HUD fund. Like if you can't paper this and then be able to sell it on the public market and have the government back those loans, like it's going to be much more expensive for people to get access to the capital. And so just really thinking thoughtfully about how the paper of ADUs is going to work is really important, to be able to like make them more broadly accessible for people to be able to have affordable loans, and that like it makes its way down the pipeline to the local banks to actually have this kind of paper. Right now it's a lot of like really complicated and much more expensive privately held loans that are like not great in terms of their rates and like more usurious. And so it would be better to have a federally backed set of loan products that are available for this, but you can't make it if it's not in the legislation.
I do recall that at the state level, well, locally, there was a discussion with the New Mexico Center for Housing Economics that had spoken to Sandia Labs Federal Credit Union about financing a revolving loan fund through the state to be available to landlords that were interested in building ADUs that can then be repaid back over the sort of like lifetime of the, I mean, over probably 10 years, I would imagine, something like that. And so those discussions happened, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And I'm not really sure how much more traction they made after initially having conversations with Sandia Labs Federal Credit Union, who was really interested. And actually, Lisa Huval, Chris was the one-year lending director, I believe, at HomeWise, was who we met with, in addition to other staff. And so I went with Roger. And yeah, there seemed to be a lot of reception. I don't know what sort of, if that is, there is a consideration for that. We have the Opportunity Enterprise Fund, which is a revolving fund at the state. So there is sort of a framework for approaching that solution, if that were something that was viable. But I think this is a huge question in terms of individual landlord, sort of the power that they may have in accessing funding, um, resources or tools that may, would allow us at sort of an individual level, perhaps smaller scale, to provide additional housing units.
And
On,
I would just challenge you, Andrea, to just think about it not from like an existing landlord standpoint. Think about it from the standpoint of like your mom who has a house who now is zoned to be able to put an ADU on it in Albuquerque because of the changes. And
right. Mhm.
wants like needs to figure out how to do this and that doesn't have like the capacity of like a corporate landlord to be able to think about this. It's not just like thinking about legislation about like punishing private equity funds. It's really about thinking about everyday citizens and making sure that they have access to affordable capital to make improvements on their homes so that they can then like make their home more affordable because they're supplementing their income with an ADU or they're like housing another member of their family, XYZ, like those sorts of things. Like, and right now it's very challenging for them to access capital to be able to without doing a HELOC. And like that's may not be the best way for them to go about this if we had different sorts of loan products that were federally backed. And it's just a matter of how that paper is developed. And if the state decided to like put funds into some sort of like easily accessible product that then like a number of local banks or other entities could sell, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I apologize if I stated that incorrectly, but that's those small, they're still landlords, homeowners, or would be if they had an ADU, are who I would be who I'm talking about. Not the corporate, large enterprises. Okay, Natalie, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, so the city did a major overhaul of our zoning code, and so one of it does allow ADUs by right. What we're actually seeing is most people aren't building an ADU because of the costs, right? So they're just building a second house on the same property. Instead of doing something that's 500 square foot, they're going closer to 11 or 1200. And it is around making it pencil. It pencils better for them. But that was an interesting sort of sidebar that we saw with the change of our zoning code.
That's fabulous. I'm just going to use that as a quick jump off to share and just remind everyone that we're currently in the IDO update process. And so if you haven't done so already, please remember that you have the opportunity to submit IDO comments on the IDO update and the amendments that have been suggested, which you can do so at this website. And you can go ahead and drop comments directly on the chart. It's about 33 pages worth of amendments, just to forewarn folks. But there's some filter options that I'm sure you can tap into. Letters can be submitted until next Wednesday to be in the packet of feedback, and then on the 18th for the 48-hour materials. So don't forget to do that. Okay, any other 108.50? Yes.
Johanna, so I put the full bill text in the chat. Johanna, you might want to read section 303 in detail. If this is a particular passion of yours, ADU financing. Yeah, like Natalie mentioned, and I'm looking back at it now, it does specifically call out ADUs as able to be part of this of funding for existing homes. It starts at page 104 of the PDF. And I'm happy to meet with you guys separately about this if you want us to dive a little bit more into the FHA stuff in particular. To the comment in the chat, has this been adopted? No. The bill has not passed the full Congress or been signed by the president yet. It did clear the Senate chamber, so it's halfway there. And these changes will go into effect once it passes the House and is signed by the president, likely as attached to the defense bill.
Which is why you need to email the defense committee and ask them to add it to their agenda so it passes.
Yes, exactly. And also, while you're at it, recommend the House maybe go back to work.
Great, thank you both. I do want to just thank you, Natalie, for offering to share your letter. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with us, and we'll make sure to circulate it to our members, if other people want to adapt their own and send to your local federal representatives. I do have one question, and I don't know if it's for you guys or if it's anybody else on the call knows, but I was really curious about the opportunity zone mapping. And since that's done locally and we have an opportunity maybe to have a voice in that, I was wondering if anyone knows how that's happening at the governor's office, if there's a special committee or commission or who's looking at that right now, since it has to be done in a short 6 or 7 months.
What I do know is that it'll be the Economic Development Department that'll lead that effort. I know that my team is gonna meet with them probably before the end of the year to talk about how they're doing that. I don't think they've fully ramped up yet. They have yet about 6 months to figure out the zones they're gonna nominate. And you're right, China, it's a great process for folks to participate in, to recommend. And actually, I will put in the chat a map of all of the eligible zones in New Mexico. The Business Insider did a nice visual representation of all of the possible zones under the new restrictions. The rules for the program changed a little bit with the reauthorization this summer. And they tweaked a little bit which census tracts are eligible based on poverty level and unemployment numbers. But they did add additional bonuses for rural areas. So that's one area where New Mexico could stand to benefit. There's additional bonuses for investing in these rural opportunity zones. So if you scroll through this article, there is that nice map feature. You can zoom in on New Mexico. When we find out from the state how they're doing it, happy to share with you folks. I'm sure they will come out with their plan too at some point. Okay, and I know it's the Economic Development Department that'll be leading that.
That's great, thank you.
Just as also wanted to share, I'm going to share my screen just quickly, and Katie, I'm going to go ahead and drop that the resource, the map that you just shared, along with I will be placing, I'm sorry, are you all seeing? Can't really tell what screen you're seeing. Hold on, me just make sure. Okay, great. So just wanted to make sure that folks knew where we held our meeting file. So for this meeting and all other membership meetings, we put the PowerPoint presentation as well as the recordings on our website. And so let's see, you can sort of see an overview, highlights, notes that we have. And then, we have some that have these recordings attached that you can
Miriam
click
Hicks.
on. And then we've got some national resources. We'll be putting the information shared in today's session here as well, and we can include that map so folks have a reference point. If folks have any other sort of training opportunities, information about movement, or resources that you would like us to upload onto this page, feel free to email us. I'll drop my email into the chat. We'll actually, I'll go ahead and drop the general Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition email into the chat, and then we'll have someone post it up on our resource. And of course, gotta do the shout out again. If you'd be interested in becoming a member, you can click on that link at the top, become a member, and then decide on your sort of level of joining. It's a pretty low contribution level for organizations, and we tried to kind of keep it a little heavier on the larger organizational size rather than individual members, so that we ensure that the membership is accessible for folks. As members, we have opportunities to join our working groups. We have a legislative and policy working group that has been meeting and is working on, some of the education efforts that we were, which is where my question came from for Cabinet Secretary Nair regarding the upcoming legislative session. And other sort of, I think as a board as a whole, we usually collectively decide how to address sort of local policy bills that are introduced in city council and things that come across EPC that we feel like we really need to have a voice into. If you all would be interested in addressing those issues, concerns, or if you have a particular, piece of legislation, a bill, or there's any other sort of political movement that you think as a member we should really have a voice in, and you would like to contribute your thoughts to that, please feel free to email us. We really want to ensure that we're representing the network. We are, a small but mighty group of board members, and could always would really appreciate your engagement and support as well as we move through yet another year of housing, advocacy to meet the need here in the state, and particularly the Albuquerque metro area. Sorry, I did not mean to interfere with the discussion, so I'm just going to go ahead, and I don't know if there's any more that you all wanted to discuss, if there were any more questions. I just wanted to sort of take a moment to go through that for folks' reference.
I put my email in the chat if anyone wants to follow up about parts of this bill that either we did or did not talk about. Johanna, if you want to talk more FHA, feel free to find me anytime. China and Andrea have my info.
Great. Brittany, would you mind dropping the general email for the coalition in the chat? That'd be great. I'm going to go ahead downloading these elements. Okay. Great. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So speaking to Renya's point, so on Tuesday, yesterday, we actually, had the GEO bond introduced for the Workforce Housing
Yes.
Trust, which was voted on at a 74% rate to fund the trust fund for the next 2 years at a $10 million level. The ordinance through the city of Albuquerque is the only funding that voters get to vote on. And so that really demonstrates, the resident of Albuquerque's residents' interest in funding affordable housing. We are hoping that $10 million number increases in order to really meet the gap. And this item in particular always goes on the ballot as a bond issue. It's actually how our organization was launched. This was really a feather in our cap in moving efforts forward. And so we are just really encouraging folks to, continue to keep up with the Workforce Housing Trust Fund where you can and when you think it's possible. Really encourage increasing that, that funding amount. I think no matter when we talk about something that is reoccurring, that is a consistent contribution, and we're really pushing on a higher contribution, you never know when, certain conversations will have more influence than you think. And so we kind of, we just want to create momentum, create a little bit of, just consistent, maybe lighter, but put it into the water, so to speak, of conversation around what we want to see in terms of changes for housing funding. Okay, Winter, go right ahead.
I just wanted to get out on the table. We, the New Mexico Housing Alliance, we have sort of established some tiers of bills and what those will mean in terms of action for the 30-day legislative session. So we haven't voted on those yet, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of tier ones, which are ones that we're really sort of be pushing this year. I think the view is it's a 30-day. We've got a lame duck governor. It's a, budget. And we don't, although I think a lot of the same bills are gonna be introduced this year, we don't necessarily think that they'll pass, maybe, but maybe the one on manufactured housing might. So I just wanted to get that out on the table. And then for the federal delegation folks that are on here, and I suppose I could look this up myself, but I forget which federal district it's in, but is the Real Page case still ongoing, or did DOJ drop it? Does anybody know?
I don't know. Winter, does anybody else on the New Mexico Housing Alliance have, or any other folks have information on that? Okay.
That'd be more for like Katie or
I do not know.
Ben Ray's office.
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I don't work on DOJ issues most of the time, but
I mean, I think the assumption was that they were gonna drop it, but I think, is it Graystar or one of the big ones settled relatively recently? So I was just wondering if it was still moving forward.
Great. And just to give a little bit of background, the New Mexico Housing Alliance is an alliance of various organizations and coalitions across the state. And so the Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition has been participating in the alliance, which meets on a bi-monthly, every other week basis, in order to discuss how we can collaborate, collectively push certain legislation or encourage certain legislation, educate about certain legislation, in whatever ways may be feasible within the constraints of our organizations. It includes members such as the ACLU, the Center for New Mexico Center for Law and Poverty, New Mexico Eviction Prevention, the Center for Housing Economics, the Coalition to End Homelessness, ourselves. There are many on the list. And so if you are an organization that's interested in connecting on that, again, feel free to reach out to me. But really, Celia is who is at the New Mexico Center for Housing, New Mexico Center for Law and Poverty. She would be your appropriate point of contact. But feel free to in the chat if you'd be interested in getting more information about that. If you'd like to drop that in the chat, we can definitely get information your way. Okay, well, we are 9 minutes ahead of schedule, and so I think we have everything wrapped up. Katie and Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today. It has just been such a pleasure having you and having you share your wealth of information, as well as everyone that's participated in the conversation. We definitely, move at the speed of our members. And so just really appreciate folks bringing their brains to the table, thinking thoroughly through how we're moving forward in our strategies across various organizations, because as we know, housing can only move if we have an ecosystem that is ready to move. And so want to thank you all again and remind you that there are more intense ways to be involved. I know that we had a recent poll where many voters said that you would like more programming, and we would love for that to happen. We are just a little constraints in the capacity we have right now. And so if anyone is interested in sort of spearheading some efforts, we would be happy to support and really just have that be a part of our sponsored programming. Again, thank you all so much, and please check out our website, and we hope to see you all soon. All right, take care.